unhealthy masculinity is I think the traditional masculinity, which is you've got to just tough it out and you've got to do it on your own, and it's dog eat dog and it's alpha male and all of that. And I think it's unhealthy because it traps men in that emotional prison. Where do you go with that? 40% of men who suicide have never had any contact with a health agency or professional support environment.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Finding Equilibrium show. I'm delighted to be here, delighted you're here, and delighted to have my guest, David Pointon. So David and I met, we must have been, 3 years ago. And I was very intrigued to learn about the men's table. And it took me a couple of years for me to actually join the men's table, but it's come at a very important point, I would say, in my life. So delighted that you're here, David. How are you and where are you today?
Thanks, Lawrence. Yeah, great to be here. Yeah, I'm actually down on the south coast of New South Wales in a little spot called Berry. Beautiful little town. If you haven't been there as a listener, I'd encourage you to get there sometime.
So it sounds wonderful. You mentioned it before, and it's on my to visit list. So David is the co-founder of the Men's Table, as I mentioned. So it's always interesting, always intrigues me when I hear why people found anything. Like what was the journey? I'd love you to introduce yourself to the audience and say a little bit about the Men's Table as well.
Yeah, sure. I was running a business of my own, and it was not my first business. So I suppose I've had some practice at starting things and getting things going. It's probably one of the things I really enjoy and I find energy around. But in regard to the Men's Table, I was really just part of a group of men who came together. I was sitting in a business networking group for a couple of years. It was a male-female group back in 2011. And one of the guys one morning stood up and said, "I want to start a men's group. Who's in?" And I had an instant yes. And I look back now and I'm clearer on why the instant yes, and I can talk about that in a little while perhaps. But we gathered together. There was probably 16 guys in total who came through the door in the first few months. At some point, we settled into a rhythm of monthly gatherings, and a group of 12 ended up being the enduring members. And we were pretty clear from the start. We wanted to have a different kind of conversation, certainly not a business conversation, and not one that you might often have at a dinner party or over some beers and wine, and where you sort of debate the issues and talk about the issues of the world. That's all very sort of third person. It's about the world and about others. And we were clear, no, we wanted to talk about what's going on for each of us, the highs and the lows. And the impulse for that had been the week before Ben had stood up and invited in, let's have a men's group. He was in a conversation with two other guys, and he was talking about, some real struggles he was having, going through a marriage separation and divorce, and it had affected his own business and his mental health. And he was being very open and honest and vulnerable about where he was at. And when he finished, the other two guys who he was with turned around and started to share what they were going through, similar kinds of things. And he realized, whenever anyone is vulnerable and willing to be open, it opens a door for others to step through and share what's going on for them as well. And for blokes particularly, that can be a real challenge. Then ideally needs to be an invitation so that men feel comfortable that they can step in and start getting real and talking about what's really going on. So that's been the core impulse. And we sat together for just over 10 years now, and have forged very deep bonds and a deeply trusted place where we can really talk about whatever. And so that was the basis of the original idea. Yeah.
Wow. And then just whilst we're talking about this, I'd love to dig a little bit deeper, because I think what you've covered are some very kind of core issues. So when we think about men, and I include myself in that, we haven't been brought up in a way to really express ourselves emotionally in the same way that women are, and of course that can cause problems. And we know the statistics. I don't know if you have them off the top of your head, but I know the suicide rates in Australia for men are pretty high. I don't know if you have those on off the top of your head, but it's something like, I think, 7
Yeah,
a day or
it's 3.5 times the number of men than women who suicide each day. Yeah, and it's between 6 and 7 a day. It's a very high number. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very high. So there's clearly a problem, and the solutions are a multitude, but being able to actually talk and express yourself. But what was the journey from one table where you've been for 10 years to how many tables are there now?
Yeah, we launched our 39th table last week. Yeah.
Wow, 39. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Well done, well done. And
Thank you.
so, what was the path? What moved you from, because it sounds like you're a business owner. You were part of a networking group. Someone said, let's who's interested in being part of a men's group, and you said, yeah. 10 years later, you're still part of the men's group, but somewhere along that journey, the ideas expanded, and it was like, if we can do it once, we can do it 39 times. So
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so a couple of threads that you've opened there. I'll touch on that, men's traditional views of masculinity and how we can get stuck. But firstly, the rest of the story. So we'd been sitting together for 7.5 years or so, and I was at a period in my life where I was quite open to new opportunities. I'd let my business go at that point, and so it was. What did I say? It was early 2019, and I was talking to a female friend who was gathering women together, and she said, I'm doing this women's work. She said, what are you doing about men's work? And I wasn't really thinking about men's work. It wasn't something in my radar. But I straight away, because I was in this sort of stage of opening to new possibilities, and that's kind of why I left my business as well, was like, there's something else here for me. And I phoned Ben, and he had a real interest in men's well-being all the way through. And I said, Ben, what are we doing about men's work? And we had a meeting, and we started to hatch some grand schemes. But 10 minutes later, we sort of realized, hang on a minute, we've got our men's table. Like it works. Why don't we just see who else wants to do that? And it wasn't the first time, I suppose. There'd been a couple of nights over the years where, as the group of men, we realized we were doing something very special. And we would say, gee, imagine, there must be other men who would want this. So the first thing we did, we went back to our men the next month, and we said, we want to write down, what have we learned about how this works? And we also want to write down how it didn't work, because we had bumped into each other. We'd had a couple of nights through those years where there'd been some conflict and some tension about how the table was functioning. Somebody felt like their needs weren't being met. So we wrote all of that down, and we called them the fundamentals. It was 2 pages of guidelines. We've added another piece called the safety net. And we've used these sort of table metaphors. So we had an entree night, an introductory night in Surrey Hills in February 2019. And some men came along, and at the end of it, they said, this is great. We want to have a table. So we were like, okay, off you go. Let's help you start a table. And then fairly quickly, tables started to form. Now, at that time, we were just the 12 guys who'd formed that first table. But we also started to hear some recurring patterns, because at the entrees, we asked men, why did you come tonight? What's happening in your life that when you heard about this idea of the men's table, something resonated for you? And there's definitely themes. So I'll give you a few of those, because it's about that sort of masculine stuff that we've got going on. One guy early on said, look, I've got mates, but we just talk about footy and shit. And what he was talking about is, and I can relate to it. I've got a group of mates I play golf with, and it's just banter. It's surface level. We've never really made any agreements with each other that, what, we could actually talk about other stuff, like real stuff. How are we feeling about things? So there's that superficiality with a lot of blokes and the way they relate. Other men have told us when they come, they have invested all their energy and their time into their work and their career. and all they've got is maybe their family, and they've basically done no investment into other relationships outside of work. And so, you know, they get to a point where they go, wow, I really don't have other people around me who I feel connected with. And I suppose there's other precipitating events that also happen for a lot of men. So a marriage ends, or a significant relationship ends, or they become redundant, or they might move interstate, or from another country, or from the country to the city. So they're in unfamiliar ground. So all of these precipitating events also lead them to look around and go, who have I got? Who have I got to talk with? Who have I got to share this with, and go through this with? And so that sense of a disconnection, men feeling disconnected and realizing that they haven't got perhaps what they had when they were younger, has been a key thing. And I think it feeds into what you said about that sort of male norm, which, we were all raised in, certainly in our generations. A lot of the men are sort of in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. The generations we were raised in said, you can't show any weakness. It's a dog eat dog sort of situation. And you've got to be able to do it on your own. You just got to tough it out. And so men say that, don't they? I'll be right. I'll sort it out myself. That's just a classic sort of one-liner.
So interesting, yeah, because it's programming, really, isn't it? It's kind of you hear it enough and you believe it to be true, and it's only when you get to a certain point in your life that you realize that it isn't true, and you have to learn a different way of thinking and behaving, and that's challenging. So you have people come in from all different parts of life, but the conversation is about real conversations. You're not talking about golf and footy and
That's right. Yeah, the guidelines talk about speak from the I, use I statements. So here's what's happening over there, with the ex-wife or with the kids or with, work or something. And this is what happened and this is what they did. But what the real focus is here's what I feel about that. Here's my experience of that. And just that simple act of using I in the statement allows people to personalize and connect with what is actually going on for me. Sharing from the heart, so talking about feelings, is another guideline. So that's a simple invitation, but because it's the invitation and it's written down on a piece of paper when we help start tables, it basically makes it normal that at the men's table, that's what you do. And so it's giving the invitation and making it simple for men to do that. We also say no alpha male behavior, and there is other things, no politics and religion, and no business talk. And what those things do is it supports the safety, so that there's an environment that can be trusted. Because from very young, particularly as boys, maybe girls can relate to it as well. If there's a bully in the schoolyard, you keep your head down and you get out of the way. So as adults, the alpha male rocks up. People just start looking at their shoelaces and just clam up. It doesn't feel like an environment where you're going to be open. So we don't want that kind of dynamic in tables, and we don't get it. The kind of men who are attracted and who abide by the agreements, because it's not a set of rules, but it's the foundation stones for a table. They set the tone and they say, no, we're going to have a different kind of conversation here. And there's also no leader. Everyone at the table leads, and that's another part of it, because we're all used to the big guy or the leader or the person in charge, and that we defer to them for what's going to happen. And so it's a self-organizing group. It's just men from the local community who come together around these agreements and say, yeah, we want to have a different kind of conversation. And what it does is it actually creates a sense of tremendous community and a belonging. People, as the months go on and the years go on, because it's the same men meeting each month, that sense of community and that level playing field, that sense that we're all connected here. A lot of people don't even know what they each do in their work, because it's not what we're talking about at the table. It might be, oh, I've got an issue at work, but they may not even reference, what my work is or what my profession is or whatever. And that's a wonderful thing. One of the guys said to me at one of the tables, we do an annual visit, and this group had been together over a year, and I was sitting with them. He said, one of the great things about this table is, it's about who you are and not what you do.
I love that. I love that. It because it sounds, and having experienced this now, it takes a while to, because I think the table that we're both part of, it's how long, when did we start that? It was probably
Early
like
this year, wasn't it? Yeah.
yes, it's getting on for a year, and it's interesting just to see how it does evolve. Because to be open and to really share, it does take a while to build that trust. And because you've been part of a table now for a decade, so in that period of time, everyone would have gone through the ebbs and flows of life. We all do, and if that becomes a huge support system during those periods, then of course that makes you closer and stronger. In your experience now with 39 tables and trying to replicate that, can you, I'm trying to find the right words to say this, but because trust is that invisible thing, and it's
Mm,
exactly what you described, like the alpha male comes along and suddenly the culture changes, because it
mm,
really is the culture of a table. And a lot of people who
yes.
are listening to this will be part of work cultures or family cultures, and it's hard to be able to replicate that kind of culture, to create that kind of positive supportive culture. But I
Mm,
know in your original table you said there have been ups and downs and disagreements and things like that. And I remember you shared with me once before a story of something that occurred which really kind of sort of brought the table together. And I'd love you to share that example or a different example of how
mm.
you create a positive, psychologically safe environment where people can feel that where people can feel that they can be open and share these things which are deeply personal. Let's face it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, great question. I mean, I've always been a real student and fascinated by group dynamics and groups. And so doing this work and helping support tables as they build is of great interest to me from that perspective as well. And so I've always been asking myself the same sort of question. What does it take for trust to build? And how do you get groups who really harmonize and get into an environment where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, where there is the X factor is there, the culture is strong. And I don't think there's this sort of one answer. There's no formula in a way of, it's not a step by step process. Each table forms in its own way. It is true though. I mean, the model of forming, storming, norming, and performing is one that's used in corporates a lot. There is some truth in that model, in that groups do need to move through a forming stage, getting to know each other, and so on. And then the norming stage is sort of bumping into each other. We are starting to see more tables who will reach out to the kitchen, so that we've called ourselves in the office the kitchen, serving the tables. And we'll get a call. Oh, I'm feeling like our table's not in a great place right now, or there's something that's been really irking me, and I don't know what to do about it. And in the guidelines, we talk about deal with issues at the table. Put it on the table. And then it's like, yeah, but I don't want to make someone wrong. And it's like, no, that's right. You can have two kinds of conversations in any group, really, but certainly at the men's table. You can talk about life outside the table, which is what most of the time is spent. Here's what's happening at home, or here's what's happening at work. But you can also talk about life inside the table. In other words, here's something that I feel about my experience of being at this group. And that's a brave move, because somebody has to be honest in their relationship with the other men at the table. And
Mm.
that's a galvanizing moment for every table. And some groups may not get there for a couple of years or more before something's really started to get up the nose of somebody. And it can be simple things. A man repeatedly takes what seems to be more than his fair share of time. Or we've got one guideline which says no fixing. And so it's about really just being a listener to the other people when they've taken the turn to share, and not having that impulse to go, oh, you know what you need to do, or, my brother-in-law, he had the same thing. And, you know,
Yes.
and if there's too much of that, that might start to frustrate someone. It's like, we've got this guideline that's no fixing. We're meant to be just really listening to each other, but those two blokes over there, they're forever trying to fix, the other guy. So that might be something that start. And so it's like, at what point is the person willing to step in and have the courage to go, you know what, there's something that I need to share about the table tonight, not about my life outside the table. And that is very much a moment that helps to define and strengthen the glue of the table, And that was certainly what happened at MT1. And that's why this reference is in the guidelines, because we realized that every group of people do end up in some sort of a conflict or tension situation. You can't just be happy campers forever. And so it's not if, but when a conflict happens, how do you work with it? It's a part of life. And rather than shying away from it, stepping in and being in the conversation, but owning your own feelings, owning this is what my experience of what's happening is, not you're wrong, you're an idiot, you're doing this incorrectly. And so we had that a couple of times, as I said, a few times at MT1. One was about commitment, and that's a big part of the men's table. What it is to build that trust as well. To go back to your other question, trust is also about am I dependable? Is each man a dependable member of the table? In other words, do they show up regularly, and is it clear that they're there not just for themselves but also there for the other men? And that comes through in their behavior, firstly showing up and listening, but also just through their demonstration of care and compassion for the others. So, commitment can be one, and it certainly came up in MT1, a couple of guys who'd seemed to have been a bit in and out over a period of, many months, not really always showing up. And somebody goes, you know what, I feel really committed to this group of men, but I really question the commitment of a couple of other guys here. And it's really upsetting me because I don't feel that the same level of trust that I feel I'm establishing. And that led to a serious conversation about, who is committed and what does it look like for us to be committed to each other. And that's come up in other tables as well. So that's a key part of the trust building and having those tough conversations when needed.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that with me. If we move on and just kind of move out of the table, because you've done such a lot of detailed thinking about creating a healthy culture within the tables, and we've touched on some of the bigger problems, some of the drivers, and the need to have these tables in the first place. What do you think? If it's a bigger question, but when I look at society as a whole, and I look at education, and I look at the way we've brought up, and I like to think that maybe some of the beliefs that we grew up with are different today. When I look at like my own son, he's definitely much more comfortable talking about these things than he's 15, than perhaps I would have been at the same age. Do you feel, is there reason for us to feel positive about the future, i.e. that we're fixing the problem? We come back to this word fixing, and I think as men we love to fix, so it's quite hard. I personally always find it very hard to not jump in with the fixing solution. But sometimes when we talk about these things, or when I listen to you speak, I feel it. It's like, when you hear truth, and it kind of it connects with you at a deep level. And then I look to externally, and I think, are we solving the problems for the future? Are we doing the right things now to support the healthy emotional development of boys and men, so that we don't end up with the next generation of 40s, 50s who are at a similar point. And we can solve this problem. We talked about suicide, and obviously that gets to a point where people are desperate, not connected, and a terrible thing. So prevention is always much better than cure, and everything we talk about is about early intervention or prevention, and what you're doing is very much aligned with that strategy. But when you look externally and you look at the wider society, do you feel hopeful about the future, that we are changing things that will see benefit in the future?
Yeah, great questions. And what our purpose is: healthy men, healthy masculinities, healthy communities. And so, the healthy masculinities piece is a big part of that. And I think that's what I'm hearing in your question as well, because, unhealthy masculinities is, I think, the traditional masculinity, which is you've got to just tough it out and you've got to do it on your own. And it's dog eat dog, and it's alpha male and all of that. And I think it's unhealthy because it traps men in that emotional prison, which is that they have feelings. Of course they do. We all do. But if they're not able to express them, and if they're not able to feel that they can be vulnerable and allow themselves to be seen in that way, where do you go with that? And so there's the really disturbing stat about suicide is that 40% of men who suicide have never had any contact with a health agency or professional support environment. So they go under the radar, and that means they have been entirely trapped. Okay, so that's a big assumption, but let's assume that they must be really struggling to not be able to reach out. So yeah, it looks pretty grim, but I think there is cause for hope, and I think things are changing. So I mean, Are You Okay has been at it now for 10 years, and it's just one, of the messages, hey, have a conversation, ask somebody, are they okay? And be prepared to really listen. We're seeing this massive swing with like public figures, sports stars, the big superheroes on the sports field, politicians, leaders in community who are going, you know what, I'm tagging out, I'm tapping out here. I've got a mental health issue. I'm going to take some time out. That's a brave move when you're in the public eye, and particularly when you look back not that many years, there was a massive stigma about talking about mental health, and there are still, the reality for some is they still fear that if they speak up at their workplace, they will be labelled, they will be given less opportunities. It'll be a red mark on their HR record. That's an incredibly sad thing, but I think that's changing. And so some of your listeners are in that space, and they certainly don't want that in their well-being, domains. So I think it is changing, and more men are coming to us who are saying, I've had that masculine thing going on, and I want to change. It's time for me to connect. It's time for me to have real conversations. So I guess we're lucky in as much as we're meeting the men who are ready. And we know that a whole lot of men are not yet coming toward us who perhaps, we hope one day will. We've just done some research about men's help seeking, and because it's a proven and demonstrated set of data that men don't take up health agency support and program support as much as women. And we're like, why is that? What's going on? And one of the questions we asked the men, apart from their own help seeking and what led them to reach out and so on, was, how do we get more men off the couch and into community, as a sort of a metaphor? And, there were varying responses to that. And so it was really tapping into what do they see? Same question that you've asked me. And, some would say, look, it's up to each man. And for some, it's going to take them bottoming out, having a really, really tough experience before they realize they can't do it on their own. And for others, they said it is happening. It's happening slowly, but it's happening. Men are starting to be more willing to be open. So that also was encouraging and supported that idea that I think there is hope. Yeah. And we're seeing change.
That's wonderful. Yeah, no, and I relate to that as well. In the work that we see, we're definitely seeing, just on the point around mental health, that there's a much greater awareness, thanks to the whole COVID situation, that we all have mental health, and we need to have support systems in place to ensure that we remain balanced, and if moments get bad, and it's not just the big life changes that we've talked about before, but there are days we feel bad, and we need to support we need to recognize why we're feeling bad and take early action, so it doesn't become this big problem. So
yeah,
thank you, David. I love this expression around trapped in emotional prisons, and I think the work that you're doing is very much focused on freeing people from these emotional prisons, or at least giving them awareness that they can be free, and giving them the key to the door. Where can people find out more about the work that you do and about the men's table? You say there are 39, but I know you're planning to grow that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So we've just really moved through a proof of concept stage as an organisation over these first 2.5 years or so, and we're just now gearing up for a sort of next phase of expansion to have tables in each of the states around Australia. And we've also started to build tables in regional communities in Australia, so not just in the cities, which has been fantastic. And so the best bet for anyone is to go to the website, themenstable.org, and we have these entrees. So we do them on Zoom, where men from anywhere can join, and we also do them in different locations to help a new table to form. So if somebody sees that there's not a local entree, they can initially do it on Zoom, knowing that ultimately the table will meet in person. And tables meet in private rooms of pubs or restaurants in a local setting. And the only cost to a man is the cost of the meal and a drink. There's no membership fee. There's nothing ever to sign. So it's a really grassroots activity. And the thing is, too, half of your listeners at least will be women. And whilst they're not going to come to a men's table, they'll know men in their lives who they might want to just nudge. And some women have got a relationship where they can just say to their man or their brother or somebody, "You need to check this out." For other women, they tell us, they have to be a little bit more nuanced, just dropping a hint, or we've got postcards, just putting a postcard on the fridge or whatever. But about 40% of men who come to our entrees are there because of a woman who's helped them to kind of pay attention and start saying, "Hey, I need to be more connected. My sister told me, or my daughter's been on at me for 10 years."
Yeah, I think that's very true with all of health and well-being in my experience as well. Often it's the women who are the ones who open the door. So, but let me acknowledge you, David, for the amazing work that you're doing. I mean, there's such a huge need for supporting psychological well-being of everybody. And men are struggling, and there are many reasons for that. But it's wonderful to know that there are these tables and forums that allow people to connect, because I think we've all learned that one of the key pillars, and it's very much part of my whole Finding Equilibrium model, connection is such a key part of our life and such a key part of well-being. So thank you for everything you're doing, and it's been great chatting with you, and thank you for your time. I know how busy you are, so I really appreciate you spending
Lawrence.
an hour with us. All right.
Great.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, David, and thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. Thank you.